What if the most misunderstood man in modern life isn't the one who talks less, but the one who leaves the room early, turns down the invitation, and goes home? Because he's not running from people, he's protecting something inside him that the noise can't touch. Most of us were trained to treat constant engagement like proof of life, as if a calendar full of plans is the same thing as a life with meaning. And if you choose stillness, you must be lonely, you must be stuck, you must be missing out. But there's another possibility, one that's older than our culture and more honest than our assumptions, that home can be a sanctuary where a man repairs his mind, reclaims his attention, and becomes more himself, not less. In 1665, as the plague hollowed out London and fear reshaped everyday life, a young Isaac Newton left Cambridge and returned to Woolsthorpe for a long stretch of isolation, and from the outside it could have looked like retreat, like a brilliant life put on pause by circumstances he couldn't control. But inside that quiet, the deeper work began, the kind that only happens when a mind finally has enough silence to think without interruption, to follow a question all the way down, to build a private universe of understanding before the public ever sees the result. And that's the frame for this episode. The sovereign man doesn't choose home because he's hiding. He chooses it because he's building emotional self-containment, restoring mental currency, training discipline, meeting the true self without a mask, and resisting a world that's addicted to stimulation. And with that in mind, let's begin, because the first pillar explains everything that comes after it. 1. Emotional self-containment is the internal compass that makes a man impossible to hijack, because when your sense of self lives inside you, the outside world can't keep yanking it around like a leash. Most of us don't notice how often we're paying a hidden tax just to exist socially. Adjusting our tone, smiling at the right time, explaining ourselves, proving we're fine, proving we're capable, proving we belong. And that constant proving slowly trains the nervous system to depend on feedback the way lungs depend on air. Anthony Storr wrote about solitude feeding the world of ideas, and that's not some poetic escape, it's a practical diagnosis. When we're not constantly being reflected back by other people, we finally hear our own thinking clearly, and for a certain kind of man, that clarity is nourishment. This is why home feels different for him, because home removes the demand to be interpreted. And in that removal, he becomes his own witness again, not performing, not negotiating, not editing his personality in real time. Now ask yourself this with brutal honesty. When you get irritated by someone, are you reacting to what they said, or are you reacting to what their reaction threatens to mean about you? Because that's usually the hook. Someone's tone, someone's dismissal, someone's disrespect hits a sensitive place where we still want permission, and the moment we want permission, we become easy to provoke. The sovereign man trains the opposite reflex. He returns to his own compass first, then he speaks. Here's the same-day action that builds that muscle without drama. The next time you feel that spike, your chest tightens, your jaw sets, your mind starts rehearsing speeches, don't answer immediately. Take one slow breath and ask one quiet question before you do anything else. What do I know to be true about me, even if this person never understands me? Then, name one concrete proof, not a motivational line. Something factual like, I keep my word, I'm consistent, I'm building skills in silence. I've survived worse than this, and let that proof be your anchor for 5 seconds. Then respond, or don't respond, from that anchored place. This is how we stop handing strangers the steering wheel of our inner life, because once your identity becomes self-contained, you don't need to defend it. And when you don't need to defend it, people lose their ability to rent space in your head for free, and that's the first real freedom. 2. Restoring mental currency is where the logic of the sanctuary becomes undeniable, because once we stop arguing with the outside world about who we are, we start noticing something even more practical. Our energy is not infinite, and not every interaction deserves the same payment. Susan Cain talks about how some of us are wired to process the world more deeply, which means the world costs us more, and that's the part most people miss when they judge the man who prefers home. They assume he's avoiding life, when in reality he's managing his nervous system like a serious person manages money, because he's learned, sometimes the hard way, that constant stimulation isn't social, it's expensive. A crowded room isn't just people, it's noise, micro-decisions, facial expressions to read, tones to interpret, small performances to maintain, and by the time you walk out, you're not just tired, you're fragmented, like your attention got split into 100 tiny pieces, and none of them came back with you. And when we run that depleted, we become easier to provoke. That's the uncomfortable truth. Most anger is not strength, it's fatigue looking for an exit. When the internal battery is low, a minor comment feels like an insult. A slow driver feels like a personal attack. A small inconvenience feels like disrespect. And suddenly we're mad at people, when we're really mad at how thin we feel inside. The sovereign man understands this, so he treats home like a biocharger, not because he's fragile, but because he wants to show up to life from a full tank, not fumes. He doesn't chase peace as an aesthetic, he protects peace as a resource. Here's the same-day action that turns this from a nice idea into a real advantage. Do a quick mental currency audit right after any social block, work meeting, family visit, even a long phone call. Before you scroll, before you talk to anyone else, take 60 seconds and label the cost, out loud if you can. That was a high-cost interaction, or that was nourishing, or that drained me for no reason. Then choose a recharge ritual that matches the cost, not a random distraction. If you're high cost, don't refill with more noise, refill with stillness. One simple version: 15 minutes at home with no input, no music, no podcasts, just a shower or tea, or sitting near a window while your mind recomposes itself. Think of it like plugging your phone into a charger instead of shaking it and hoping it turns back on. Try it the next time you come home irritated and you don't even know why. Do the audit. Choose the matching recharge. Then notice something quietly powerful. When your mental currency is restored, fewer people can buy a reaction from you because you're not running on scarcity anymore. And that sets up the next pillar, because once your energy is protected, your relationship with silence changes completely. 3. Solitude as the mark of maturity is where this stops being a personality preference and becomes a psychological achievement. Because being alone isn't just about having no one around you, it's about what happens inside you when there's no audience, no distraction, and no easy escape. Donald Winnicott talked about the capacity to be alone as a sign of emotional health, and that idea hits hard if we're honest, because a lot of people aren't actually afraid of being alone. They're afraid of what they'll feel when they're alone. The silence brings up unfinished thoughts, old memories, insecurity, regret, that restless inner noise that gets covered all day by conversations, screens, errands, and constant motion. So we keep moving, we keep filling, and then we call it a social life, when it's really a strategy to avoid meeting ourselves. The sovereign man chooses something harder. He chooses to build a friendship with his own mind. Not because he's above people, but because he's done pretending that peace is supposed to come from the outside. He understands that solitude is either a punishment or a privilege, depending on whether you've trained your inner world to be a safe place to live. That's why the same quiet room can feel like prison for one person and freedom for another. One person is trapped with their thoughts. The other person is finally with their thoughts. And that difference is maturity. Now here's the question that exposes the real issue. When you're alone, do you immediately reach for something, your phone, a video, a message, because the silence feels too empty, or because it feels too honest? Because if you can't sit with yourself for 10 minutes without reaching for a hit of stimulation, that's not a moral failure, it's just a skill you haven't trained yet. And the skill is trainable the same way breath control is trainable, gradually with consistency, without drama. So here's the same-day action, simple but serious. Set a timer for 10 minutes tonight and practice being alone on purpose, not as a break, not as recovery, but as training. No music, no podcast, no scrolling. You can sit on the couch, you can sit on the floor, you can even walk slowly around your room, but you're not allowed to feed the noise. Your only job is to observe what shows up. Tension in the chest, impatience, random worries, old conversations replaying, and to label it quietly: restlessness, pressure, planning, anger, sadness, without fixing it and without obeying it. If your mind tries to drag you into a story, bring it back to one physical anchor, your breathing or the feeling of your feet on the ground. 10 minutes, that's it. And here's what changes when you do this consistently. You stop fearing the quiet, which means you stop depending on chaos to feel alive. And once you stop depending on chaos, other people lose their ability to disturb you with small things, because your baseline becomes steadier than their moods. That naturally leads to the next pillar, because when you can be alone without collapsing into boredom or anxiety, home stops being just a place you live. It becomes a dojo where you train how you live. 4. The home as a dojo of discipline is where the sanctuary becomes active, because a sovereign man doesn't use home as a couch to disappear into. He uses it as a space to practice deliberate living, the way an athlete uses a gym, not to look busy, but to become capable. Henry David Thoreau went to Walden to strip life down to its essentials, not because he hated society, but because he wanted to see what was real when you remove the unnecessary. And that's exactly what home can become when it's chosen consciously, a place where your days stop being an accident. Outside, the world is full of random demands, traffic, interruptions, other people's timing, other people's expectations, and that randomness creates a subtle helplessness, like you're always reacting, always adjusting, always late to your own life. But inside your walls, you can design rhythm, and rhythm is power. A lot of us misunderstand discipline as punishment, like discipline means grinding your teeth and forcing yourself through misery, but the deeper definition is simpler. Discipline is what creates freedom later. And the home is the easiest environment to build discipline in, because you control the friction. You control what you see when you wake up, what you reach for when you're tired, what your hands touch when you're restless. And if you set that up well, your future self is protected from your weaker moments. That's why some men love being home, because home lets them become the author of their own defaults. And once your defaults are strong, you don't need constant willpower, you need consistency. So ask yourself this one uncomfortable question. When you're at home, are you being shaped by your environment, or are you shaping it? Because if home is chaotic, clutter, random screens, endless snacks, open notifications, then home isn't a sanctuary. it's an amplifier of distraction. But if home is structured with intention, it becomes a silent coach that keeps you aligned even when motivation disappears. Here's the same-day action that turns your home into a dojo in under 30 minutes. Choose one anchor ritual and one protected zone. The anchor ritual is a small, repeatable act you do at the same time every day, something that tells your nervous system, we're in training now, like making coffee and then immediately opening a book for 10 minutes, or taking a shower and then writing one page of thoughts, or stretching for 5 minutes and then planning the next 3 tasks. The protected zone is a specific spot in your home where one thing happens and everything else is excluded. Maybe a chair where you only read, a desk where you only work, a corner where you only reflect. No scrolling there, no arguing there, no aimless wandering, just one purpose. You're not doing this to be aesthetic. You're doing it because the brain learns by association, and when a space has a single meaning, focus becomes easier and discipline becomes natural. Try it tonight. Pick the ritual, pick the zone, and make it ridiculously simple so you can repeat it tomorrow without resistance. Then notice the quiet shift. When home becomes a dojo, staying in stops being staying in. It becomes training, and training changes the kind of man you are. And once discipline begins to stabilize, the next thing that happens is even more intimate, because the quieter and more structured your life becomes, the harder it is to keep wearing a mask you don't believe in. 5. Meeting the true self by removing the mask is where the sanctuary turns into a mirror, because the loudest benefit of home isn't comfort, it's honesty. Out in the world, most of us wear a socially acceptable version of ourselves without even realizing we're doing it. We smooth the edges. We laugh at things that aren't funny. We hold back opinions that might create tension. We act fine when we're not. And over time, that performance becomes so normal that we start confusing it with our identity, like we're only real when someone else is watching. Osho had a blunt line about solitude, how it brings you face to face with who you are, and whether you like him or not, that insight lands, because when you're alone at home, the mask doesn't have a job anymore. There's no one to impress, no one to manage, no one to convince. And in that quiet, the real you starts speaking in a voice that isn't trying to be liked. That sounds beautiful until you realize why so many people avoid it. Because when the mask drops, the backlog appears. Thoughts you've been postponing, feelings you've been suppressing, memories you've been outrunning. The home doesn't create those things. It just stops drowning them out. And the sovereign man chooses to face that, not in one dramatic breakdown, but in small, honest conversations with himself, because he knows a painful truth. Whatever we refuse to face inside eventually finds a way to control us outside. That's when we become reactive, defensive, easily offended, easily manipulated. The mask isn't just fake, it's fragile. And fragile things get threatened easily. So here's the question to ask yourself, and it's not a comfortable one. Who are you when nobody is demanding a performance from you? Not what role do you play, not how do you look, not what do people expect, but who are you when you're just you, in a quiet room, with no one to applaud or criticize? If you don't know the answer clearly, that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It just means you've been living in reaction mode long enough that your original signal got covered by static. Here's the same-day action that makes this practical instead of abstract. Tonight, take a piece of paper, or open a notes app if you must, but paper is better, and write for 7 minutes without stopping, answering one prompt. The version of me I perform for the world is... and then finish that sentence in as many ways as your mind wants. Don't try to sound smart. Don't edit. Just spill it. Then, for another 3 minutes, answer a second prompt. The version of me that feels true at home is... and do the same. When you're done, circle one mismatch that stands out the most, like, I act confident, but I feel uncertain, or I act agreeable, but I feel resentful, or I act strong, but I feel exhausted. That circle is your next growth assignment, because you can't heal what you refuse to name. Try this once, and you'll feel why home matters. It's the only place where you can meet yourself without negotiation. And once you start living with less performance, something radical happens next. You stop craving approval like oxygen, because the true self doesn't need permission to exist, which brings us naturally to the next pillar, freedom from the tyranny of validation. 6. Freedom from the tyranny of validation is where a man finally stops living on a leash he can't see, because validation is one of the most socially acceptable addictions in the world, and most of us don't realize we have it until we try to live without it. Out there, everything quietly demands a performance. How you dress, how you speak, how quickly you reply, what you post, what you pretend doesn't hurt, what you pretend you're above. And the reward system is simple. Behave in a way the crowd recognizes, and you get a little hit of approval. The problem is that the hit never lasts, so we keep chasing it. And the chase slowly trains the nervous system to treat other people's reactions like a scoreboard for our worth. Renuka Gavrani writes about healing from the need for external validation, and the core idea is brutally practical. When your self-esteem depends on other people's recognition, you become easy to control, because anyone who can grant approval can also threaten to withdraw it. This is why the sanctuary of home matters so much for the sovereign man, because at home the gaze disappears. The invisible audience leaves the room. You're not being watched, rated, compared, or measured in real time. And in that privacy, something rare becomes possible. Authenticity that isn't performative. You wear what you want because it feels right, not because it signals status. You think what you think without rehearsing how it will be received. You rest without needing to justify it. And this is not laziness. This is recovery from a culture that treats constant visibility like virtue. Now here's the question that reveals how deep this runs. When you make a decision, do you feel the need to explain it so people won't misunderstand you? Or do you feel free to let your choices speak over time? Because the urge to over-explain is often a sign that we're still trying to manage perception, still bargaining with the imaginary jury in our head. The sovereign man starts cutting that cord, not by becoming rude or distant, but by becoming internally confirmed. He stops asking, "Do they approve?" and starts asking, "Does this align with the man I'm becoming?" Here's the same-day action that builds this freedom without turning you into a robot. Pick one small behavior you usually do for social approval and remove it for 24 hours. Not the big dramatic stuff. Something subtle, like checking whether someone saw your message, posting something just to be seen, saying yes to a plan you don't want, dressing a certain way because it's expected, laughing to fill silence. Then replace it with one private act that reinforces self-respect, something only you will know. Reading 10 pages, cleaning one corner of your space, lifting weights, writing one honest paragraph, going for a walk without your phone. The point is to train the brain to feel rewarded by alignment, not applause. Do that for a day, and you'll feel the shift. When validation isn't your fuel, people can't steer you with approval or punish you with neglect. And once that cord loosens, your attention becomes quieter and more stable, which sets up the next pillar perfectly, because the less you chase external signals, the more your mind can finally do what it was built to do: focus deeply. 7. Filtering sensory inputs to unlock deep focus is where the sanctuary becomes a cognitive advantage. Because the modern world doesn't just distract us, it overstimulates us, and overstimulation is one of the fastest paths to irritability, impatience, and emotional volatility. Some men are simply more sensitive to noise, clutter, bright screens, constant movement, and the feeling of being watched, and that sensitivity is often mislabeled as weakness, when it can actually be a kind of precision, like a finely tuned instrument that produces incredible music in the right environment and terrible noise in the wrong one. When everything is loud, the mind can't settle, and when the mind can't settle, it starts reacting to everything, because it can't distinguish what matters from what doesn't. That's when we feel bothered by everyone, not because everyone is powerful, but because our attention has been shredded into confetti. Home, when it's designed intentionally, acts like a filter. It reduces inputs so your brain can stop scanning for threats and start building something. Carson McCullers described a kind of deep inner concentration in her own work and life. And whether we attach her words to it or not, we've all felt the phenomenon. That rare state where you're so immersed in a book, a project, a skill, a problem, that time changes shape. You come out calmer, clearer, stronger, not because you escaped the world, but because you finally used your mind the way it was meant to be used. The sovereign man values home because home lets him enter that state more often, and that state is where self-respect quietly grows, because nothing builds confidence like sustained attention invested in something real. Now ask yourself this: when you're out in the world and you feel easily annoyed, is it really people, or is it the sheer volume of input your brain is trying to process all at once? Because a lot of anger is not moral, it's neurological. It's the brain saying too much and then looking for a target. If you don't recognize that, you'll keep blaming personalities for what is actually an environment problem. Here's the same-day action, simple enough to do tonight and strong enough to change your baseline within a week. Create a 2-layer input filter at home, one for your space and one for your phone. For your space, choose one room or one corner and remove 3 sources of noise: visual clutter, background sound, and random movement. That can look like clearing the surface you stare at the most, turning off the TV you don't even watch, and putting one object back where it belongs so your eyes stop tripping over it. For your phone, set one focus gate for 2 hours. Notifications off, phone in another room, and one single task in front of you: read, write, plan, train, build. When your mind tries to wander, don't attack yourself, just return, the way you'd return a child gently back to the path. Try this once and notice what happens to your emotional tone. When sensory input drops, your nervous system stops bracing. When your nervous system stops bracing, you stop being so easy to provoke. And when you can focus deeply, you stop needing constant stimulation to feel alive, which naturally leads to the next pillar. Because a man who can sit still and focus begins to see how powerful simplicity really is, not as an aesthetic, but as a form of freedom. 8. Simple living as a political act is where the sovereign man stops just protecting his peace and starts quietly rejecting a culture that profits from his restlessness. Because modern life has a hidden agreement baked into it. If you stay busy, you stay consuming, and if you keep consuming, you keep needing to stay busy to justify it. The cycle never ends. More outings, more purchases, more status symbols, more updates, more proof that you're living, until your attention becomes a public resource that anyone can harvest. Thoreau saw an early version of this trap in his own time, and his response wasn't loud rebellion. It was refusal. Not refusal of society entirely, but refusal to let society dictate what a meaningful life must look like. And that's exactly what staying home can represent for a certain kind of man. A calm no to the theater of constant activity. But here's the part that matters psychologically. When we choose simplicity, we're not just saving money or time, we're reclaiming identity. Because status chasing is, at its core, a search for belonging through symbols. Look at me, accept me, respect me. And the moment your belonging depends on symbols, you become enslaved to other people's standards. The sovereign man flips the equation. He chooses being overdoing, not in the lazy sense, but in the mature sense. He'd rather feel grounded than look impressive. He'd rather have a quiet night of clarity than a loud night of distraction. He'd rather invest in a skill, a body, a mind, a relationship that actually matters than in a performance that evaporates by morning. So ask yourself this with honesty. How often do you say yes to things you don't even want because you're afraid of what no might say about you? Because that fear is the doorway where the culture walks into your life and starts arranging your decisions. And once you see that, staying home stops being staying home. It becomes self-governance. Here's the same-day action that makes simplicity real without turning your life into a monastery. Pick one status impulse today and interrupt it on purpose. The impulse could be buying something you don't need, going out just so you're not the guy who stays in, posting something just to be seen, checking who viewed your story, upgrading something because it signals success. When you notice the impulse, pause and ask one question. What am I trying to prove right now? And to whom? Then do a replacement action that strengthens your sovereignty instead of your image. It can be small. Cook at home, read for 20 minutes, train, clean your space, work on a project, call one person who actually knows you, not the crowd. The goal isn't deprivation. The goal is to break the automatic link between restlessness and consumption. Do this a few times and you'll feel the rebellion taking shape. You start to realize that your attention is your most sacred resource, and you can spend it on noise or you can invest it in depth. And once you begin investing in depth, a strange transformation happens next. Being alone stops feeling like an empty room and starts feeling like abundance, because your inner world becomes furnished with things that actually feed you. 9. Turning loneliness into abundance is where the sanctuary stops being about defense and becomes about richness, because loneliness and solitude are not the same experience, even though the world uses the words like they're interchangeable. Loneliness is the feeling that something essential is missing, like you're outside of life looking in. Solitude, when it's healthy, is the feeling that something essential is present, like you're finally inside your own life. The sovereign man doesn't pretend he never wants connection. He's human, of course he does, but he refuses to treat connection like a rescue mission. He doesn't need people to save him from himself, because he's learned to make himself livable. That's the real secret. A man becomes hard to disturb when his inner world is a place he doesn't want to escape. And this is why his room isn't empty, even if it's quiet. It's filled with chosen things, books that shape his thinking, music that steadies his emotion, plans that give his future weight, skills that make time meaningful. That inner dialogue, sometimes messy, sometimes beautiful, that helps him understand what he actually believes. The outside world might call that boring, because the outside world confuses stimulation with life. But the sovereign man knows better. If your mind is well furnished, you don't panic when you're alone. You build, you refine, you recover, you become. Now let's get painfully practical. A lot of people feel lonely at home not because home is wrong, but because their inner world has been neglected. When you don't invest in yourself, silence feels like emptiness. When you do invest in yourself, silence feels like space. And space is where abundance grows. So the question is simple. What have you placed inside your solitude? Because solitude with nothing in it will eventually feel like punishment. Solitude with purpose becomes wealth. Here's the same-day action that turns alone into abundant without requiring motivation. Build a simple 3-item solitude menu and make it stupidly easy to access. 1 item feeds your mind. 10 pages of a book that actually stretches you. 1 item feeds your body. 15 minutes of movement, even if it's just push-ups, stretching, or a walk. 1 item feeds your future. 20 minutes on a project that compounds, like learning a skill, organizing finances, writing, studying, building something you care about. Write those 3 items down, keep them visible, and the next time you feel that lonely itch at home, don't negotiate with it. Just choose 1 item from the menu and start. Not because you're trying to fix your feelings, but because you're training your brain to associate solitude with nourishment instead of lack. Try it once and you'll notice a quiet shift. The craving for random social noise begins to drop, not because you hate people, but because you're no longer starving inside. And when your inner world becomes a place of abundance, you stop needing the outside world to constantly validate your existence. Which brings us to the next pillar naturally, because once solitude becomes rich, your home starts turning into something deeper than comfort. It becomes psychological architecture, a space that reflects and shapes the mind you live with every day. 10. Psychological architecture, the mirror mind, is where you realize the sanctuary isn't just a place you return to. It's a system that quietly returns you to yourself. Because a home is never neutral. It's either shaping you toward clarity or pulling you toward chaos. And most of us underestimate how deeply environment writes on the mind. The lighting you wake up to, the first sound you hear, the surfaces your eyes land on, the objects you keep within reach. These aren't just aesthetics, they are signals. And the brain is a signal-reading machine. It forms associations fast, then it repeats them without asking you for permission. That's why a room can make you feel calm before you even understand why, and why another room can make you feel irritated and restless even when nothing happened. The sovereign man learns to use that truth deliberately. He builds his home the way an architect builds a cathedral. Not for show, but for the kind of inner state it produces. This is also why organizing your room can feel like organizing your life. Not in the superficial influencer sense, but in the psychological sense. When your space is cluttered, your mind keeps doing microscans all day. Tiny reminders of unfinished tasks, tiny visual interruptions that keep your attention in a low-grade state of stress. You might not consciously think, "This mess is ruining me," but your nervous system feels it. It feels like you're behind, like something is unresolved, like you can't fully settle. And when you can't fully settle, you become easier to bother. You become more reactive, more impatient, less generous. Not because you're a bad man, but because your system is constantly being poked. So here's the honest question. Does your home reflect your mind, or does it fight your mind? Because if your environment is fighting you, you will spend energy just to exist in your own space, and that defeats the whole purpose of the sanctuary. The goal is to make home an ally, a silent partner that holds you steady. Here's the same-day action that turns psychological architecture from a concept into a felt reality. Pick one high-visibility surface in your home: the desk you sit at, the table you pass by, the counter you see first in the morning, and make it a mirror of the man you're becoming. Clear it to the essentials, then place one object that represents your direction, not your past. It could be a book you're actually reading, a notebook for your thoughts, a symbol of training like a weight or a resistance band, a simple framed quote you live by, even a calendar with one goal written clearly. The point is not decoration, the point is cue design. You're teaching your brain every time your eyes land there, this is who we are now. Then add a tiny ritual that seals the architecture. 2 minutes of reset before bed. Put one thing back in its place. Clear one small mess. Prepare one thing for tomorrow. 2 minutes, not to be tidy, to be sovereign, because that tiny ritual tells your mind, we close the day in control. And men who close their days in control don't wake up as easily irritated. Once you feel this, you'll understand the deeper role of home. It's not a hiding place, it's a biography written in space. And that naturally leads to the final pillar. Because when a man builds a home that restores him, the world's biggest addiction becomes obvious, our culture's fear of stillness, and the sovereign man becomes the one who breaks that spell. 11. Resisting stillness phobia is the final pillar because it names the sickness of the age without turning it into a lecture. We live in a world that treats quiet like a problem. A pause has to be filled. A moment alone has to be justified. Silence has to be explained, softened, apologized for, or medicated with a screen. And that fear isn't random, it's profitable. If we're uncomfortable sitting quietly with ourselves, we become perfect customers for distraction. We buy noise. We rent stimulation. We scroll for relief. We keep our minds busy so we don't have to feel what's underneath the busyness. The sovereign man sees the trap and steps out of it, not by becoming extreme, but by becoming calm enough to notice what most people are too stimulated to notice, that a life without stillness becomes a life without depth. Blaise Pascal had a famous line about how many human problems come from our inability to sit quietly alone in a room, and whether you treat that as philosophy or psychology, it's hard to argue with the pattern. Look at how often our worst decisions happen when we're restless, when we can't tolerate the ordinary feeling of being with ourselves, so we reach for something, someone, anything. We chase a conversation we don't even enjoy. We start an argument just to feel alive. We overreact to small disrespect because we're already internally unstable. We keep running because stopping would force us to hear what we've been avoiding. Stillness phobia doesn't just steal peace. It steals judgment. The sovereign man doesn't claim he's immune to this. He trains against it. He treats stillness like strength training for the mind. Because if you can sit in quiet without craving a hit of stimulation, you become harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, harder to distract from what matters. And that's the deeper reason he chooses home. Home gives him a place to practice the one skill the modern world quietly destroys: sustained presence. So here's the question that matters more than any theory. Can you be alone with yourself without reaching for something to change the feeling? Not forever, not for hours, just long enough to prove to your own nervous system that you're safe in your own company. Because the moment you can do that, you stop needing the world to constantly regulate you, and when the world can't regulate you, the world can't control you. Here's the same-day action, clean and real. Choose one stillness window today. 20 minutes is enough, and make it non-negotiable. No phone, no music, no background noise. Sit in your home or walk slowly in one room and let your mind do what it does without feeding it. When boredom shows up, don't fix it. When anxiety shows up, don't obey it. When the urge to check your phone spikes, don't moralize it. Just observe it like a wave rising and falling. Your only job is to stay present long enough to watch the urge pass. If you want one anchor, use a simple one. Feel the breath enter, feel the breath leave, and when your mind runs, bring it back without anger. That's the rep. That's the training. And if you do this consistently, something changes in your identity. You stop being the man who needs noise to feel real, and you become the man who can generate peace from the inside. That's why the architecture of the soul ends at home. Not because home is the whole world, but because home is where you learn to stop being owned by the world. So the next time someone labels your quiet as weakness, remember this. They're not describing you. They're revealing what they can't tolerate in themselves. Protect the sanctuary. Restore your mental currency. Build your discipline. Meet your true self. And then walk back into the world, not hungry for validation, not easily bothered, not quick to anger, just steady, just sovereign, just difficult to disturb. And when you put all of this together, you start to see the real architecture forming, not as a theory, but as a way of moving through life without being dragged by it. The sovereign man doesn't worship home as a destination. He uses it as a forge, because he knows something most people never slow down long enough to learn. The world will always offer you noise, and the noise will always come with a price. It costs attention, it costs patience, it costs clarity, it costs dignity. And if you don't choose where your energy goes, other people will choose for you, and they won't spend it the way you would. That's why the sanctuary matters. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's where you stop leaking yourself into everything and everyone, and you start becoming a man who can stand on his own internal ground. Think about what we built here. Emotional self-containment, so you don't beg for mirrors. Mental currency, so you stop paying for interactions that don't nourish you. Solitude as maturity, so silence becomes a friend instead of a threat. Discipline, so your days stop being accidents, the mask coming off, so you finally meet the real you. Freedom from validation, so your choices don't need applause, filtered input, so your mind can go deep instead of wide. Simplicity, so you stop being marketed into restlessness, abundance. So being alone stops feeling like lack. Psychological architecture, so your space becomes a quiet ally. And stillness training, so you're no longer afraid of the one thing that makes most people impulsive. None of this is about hiding. This is about ownership. Because the man who can sit quietly with himself is the man who doesn't need to prove himself. And the man who doesn't need to prove himself is the man who can't be easily provoked, easily purchased, or easily steered. So here's the one concrete action to carry out of this episode. Make it small enough that you'll actually do it tonight. Choose one corner of your home and make it a sovereign corner. Clear it. Reduce the noise. Put one object there that represents the man you're becoming. Then give it 10 minutes of stillness. No phone, no music, no input, just you returning to yourself. That's it. Not a lifestyle overhaul. A single decision that says, my attention is mine. And if you do that every day, even in small doses, you won't just feel calmer. You'll become harder to disturb, because your peace won't be borrowed from a good day or a nice interaction. It will be built the way strong things are built, quietly, consistently, from the inside. Carry that with you the next time you're tempted to chase noise just to feel alive. Close the door. Breathe. Let the world talk without you for a moment. And remember, when you can live with yourself in silence, you can walk anywhere without losing yourself.